Okay. So what we're going to do now, we're going to walk through some of the things that were going on while you're holding your arms out. Okay. I'll use that as an example of here are the things that are happening in your muscles from a metabolic standpoint, from a neuromuscular signaling standpoint, as an example. Okay. And then we'll be done with this, and then we'll talk about hormones. Okay. So last week, you guys did a very, very nice job of sort of outlining what peripheral and central fatigue are. Okay. Central fatigue is I stopped or I had to try harder, right? Because of something basically from the brain down to the neuromuscular junction. Some people argue it really should be down to the alpha motor neuron. Once you get through the alpha motor neuron, that's peripheral. It really doesn't matter. Okay. It doesn't make that big of a difference. Central fatigue is psychological factors. It's effort. Okay. It's motivation. Are you willing to continue trying as hard as you can, or are you willing to continue trying hard enough to do wherever we want to get to? Okay. Peripheral fatigue is, you can argue, basically distal to the motor neuron, distal to the neuromuscular junction. Peripheral fatigue is truly physiological. Okay. You cannot send more acetylcholine across the neuromuscular junction. You cannot release as much or more calcium out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. You cannot form enough cross bridges or break the ones that are existing to be able to continue generating that force or an adequate amount of force. Okay. That's kind of the dichotomy that we have going. Okay. Much like with metabolism, in most instances, not all, but most, you are experiencing both central and peripheral fatigue simultaneously. Okay. Many of the things, or one of the big things that happens when you begin to experience peripheral fatigue is what? Accumulate lactic acid. Okay. You accumulate hydrogen ions. As that happens, things begin to become uncomfortable. Your arms burn, your shoulders will burn. Okay. And so this idea of peripheral fatigue occurs, and it signals back to the central nervous system, and it's telling it, hey, this is unpleasant. Hey, we're taxing out metabolism pretty heavily. Maybe we should think about quitting. Maybe we should think about shutting this down. Okay, so there's this interaction between those two. Okay. Now, there is an argument, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with it. There is an argument that most fatigue you guys experience every day is central. Most of the time, we could do more, we just choose not to. It's like I'm out, I'm done, over. Okay, it sucks, I don't want to keep going, right? I'm tired of this. Think about how you guys were doing. Most of y'all made it 5 minutes, but I bet a lot of you wanted to stop, even though you probably could have kept going. Okay, there's another argument from a guy who's gone crazy. He's a South African, he's a physiologist, but he's also a doctor. And you'll see some stuff when we do a little bit of the hormone stuff today at the very, very end. He was a very, very influential guy in the 80s about understanding the role of blood glucose in fatigue, about understanding glycogen levels in fatigue. And he had an argument at one point on purpose. He was just being a pain in the ass. He was a Twitter troll before these things existed, and said that all fatigue in almost every instance in humans is central. Have you ever exercised to the point where you ran out of ATP and you could not break your cross bridges apart and actually relax your muscles? Have you exercised to the point of what we would call tetanus? Okay. And if that's not, you haven't done that, his argument was you could have done more and you chose to stop. Okay. Bernie said, like, oh, my arms were stuck. Were they? Were they really stuck? Could you put them down? Probably. Okay? I think it's a ridiculous argument. It's a fascinating, like, physiological thought experiment. It's a ridiculous argument. Okay? All of you are doing accumulating life, and all of you are experiencing peripheral. The guy's going crazy now, and he's like a crazy, like, low carb, like, don't eat carbs and you'll never get cancer. Like, he had his medical license pulled in South Africa because he was encouraging. He's not a pediatrician, but was encouraging mothers to have like their 6 months old on low carb diets and those things. Yeah, wildly dangerous sorts of things. And so he's kind of gone off the deep end, but fascinating kinds of things. So here's some things I want you guys to know. Primary sites of peripheral fatigue. Okay. What we've got is action potential propagation. Okay. Disruption of ion gradients. At some point, likely because of a lack of ATP, you cannot repolarize an axon, sarcolemma, the T-tubule, okay? And so you cannot restore the sodium potassium gradients. And when you can't restore those, then you cannot transmit another action potential, okay? The muscle or the actin and myosin are eating up all of the ATP, can't make enough fast enough, so we can't repolarize. That one happens, and happens a lot actually down in the T-tubule. So kind of 1 and 3 are going to be linked. And 2, neuromuscular transmission. You can, in rare instances, it's much more common if you come to my lab and we use electrical stimulation on your muscles. You can fire so often, so many action potentials coming out of the central nervous system that you run out of or deplete acetylcholine. You cannot pull acetylcholine back across the junction into the nerve terminal fast enough. So you send a signal, but you don't get enough acetylcholine to initiate a contraction. It's very, very rare in voluntary human exercise. Okay? Some of you might be motivated enough in small muscle mass exercise that it can happen, but we most commonly see it in artificial exercise using electricity. So we see it in animal models, in isolated muscle fibers, or just come to my lab and we'll shock your muscle and make it fatigue really fast. And we'll get it to a place where we can deplete that. Okay. Probably the most common thing we're going to see outside of the accumulation of hydrogen ions. Okay. All of you guys were likely experiencing this. Some level of failure of excitation contraction coupling. Okay. It happens in the T-tubule. The T-tubules are so small, there's not enough sodium potassium pumps in the T-tubule. And so what begins to happen is we are not able to repolarize the T-tubule. So everything is fine. The signal comes down the neuromuscular system, it comes down through the motor neuron, it gets across the junction, it gets across the sarcolemma, it makes it to the T-tubules, but you can't repolarize them, so you cannot transmit enough signal. Because of that, less calcium is released. Because there's less calcium to bind to troponin, there's going to be less cross bridges formed. Okay. It's all an anatomical thing. They're so small, so narrow, that they're prone to not being able to repolarize. So that's probably the most common side of peripheral fatigue. Okay. Let me see if I can actually get this turned off. Okay. Other things that go on, and they're going to be related to that. And big things that are going to happen ionically that contribute to peripheral fatigue. One is calcium. And calcium levels rise within a muscle because so many action potentials, so much being released from the sarcoplasm in particular. Okay. One of the things that happens is the calcium will bind to inorganic phosphate. Okay, from all of the ATP turnover. As it does that, okay, it's not going to be able to be pumped back in the sarcoplasm in particular. It will precipitate out, forms calcium phosphate, and we then have an inability to release enough calcium to continue our crossword cycle in the proper way. Okay? That happens. Related to that, but probably even more detrimental to force production, is the accumulation of hydrogen. Okay? You run glycolysis, ATP demand is so high because the energy demand is so high, right? Because you're having high force outputs very early on in exercise. And hydrogen, it basically fucks everything up. Okay? It messes up calcium release, it messes up repolarization of the membranes, it messes up the ability of calcium to bind to troponin, it messes up the myosin ATPase. Hydrogen affects everything. And so eventually, in addition to making your muscles burn, so eventually then hydrogen will shut everything down. Okay, it will shut everything down. Okay, so I kind of go through these things. All right. Now that we're gonna talk about a couple of things that are. I'll ask you guys if you think it's peripheral central fatigue. We'll start there. Okay. One of the possible things that can cause fatigue is a depletion of creatine phosphate. Okay. At some points during exercise, at some points with fatigue, you cannot make enough ATP. That's the problem. Energy demand is high, and you do not have a continued ability to make ATP fast enough to continue that much force generation. So one of the primary ones during very, very high intensity exercise is creatine phosphate depletion. Okay. You all did very nice. We went 20 seconds. You're like, hey, what's happening? Creatine phosphate. It's mostly gone. Y'all were able to continue. So in that instance, holding your arms out is not really going to have enough ATP demand, and depletion of creatine phosphate prevents you from continuing, but sometimes it does. So my question is that central fatigue or peripheral fatigue? I've run out of creatine phosphate. I cannot make enough ATP. Peripheral? Okay. Why?
I think that's because that's like physiological, like you will run out, like you can't exactly tell your brain, sort of in a sense, consciously, like taking it more out.
Well, I can tell my brain. I can use my brain to tell my brain. Now we've gone through the black hole.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
No. So here's the thing. If it's peripheral, it has to have an effect somewhere. So if I cannot make enough ATP, where am I going to get it impaired? Where do I use ATP in the muscle as part of how we generate force, or how we signal generate force? Okay, in contraction, yes, but where? Be more granular. Where?
Cross bridges.
Cross bridges. What do I need ATP to do with my cross bridges?
Release.
Release. Good. Okay. I got to release so I can go again. Where else do I need ATP in a muscle? Right. Mitochondria. Okay. Mitochondria probably needs some ATP. Sure. And really thinking about that, but more in that. Remember that giant pathway that we control all our way out, right? I know it's a lot. It's Monday. It's after Easter. We're going to think back to the things that we did 6 weeks ago and everything, right? But where else do we use energy in a muscle during contraction? We use it by the myosin ATPase to break cross bridges. Where else? What?
Trying to just like play it out of my head.
Ah, okay. So that was not hand up. We're just
Yeah.
ready to pick on somebody.
It's like a sodium pump.
Sodium pump, sure. Sodium potassium. We gotta have trouble repolarizing. Where else? Trying not to call on people, like every one of y'all said in your like midterm, like assessment things, like it terrifies me that you might call on me because the class is so big. And so I'm purposely trying not to just like say, hey, we're one of the Lilies, there's 3 of y'all, or we're one of the 5 Olivias, like can somebody answer, right? On all of that. So does anybody want to offer? There's one other place. One other place that we use energy. Anything that has to do with this, where we need energy, take circa, very good. Okay, very good. We have to have energy to pump calcium back in. Okay. So in very high intensity exercise, right? Sprinting, potentially like doing a set of 6 or 8 or 10 when you're lifting weights. Okay, maybe even 12 to 15. Very high intensity, short duration things. When creatine phosphate is depleted, we need so much ATP to continue cycling cross bridges, to pump calcium back in, and to repolarize T-tubule and the sarcolemma that we do not make enough. There's not enough available once creatine phosphate is gone. So all 3 of those processes will slow down, and that leads to less force production. That's why you can't do 1 more rep. That's why you've got to slow down when you're sprinting. Okay? You can keep going and sprinting, you just got to slow down enough. You could do 1 more rep if you lowered the weight enough, okay, to where the force needed, right, from the cross bridges is low enough that you can share that ATP. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. Now, another instance, it's related, but a little bit different. And it will come into play today when we talk about hormone stuff, and that is glycogen depletion. You have glycogen in your liver, and you have glycogen in your muscles. What is glycogen?
Stored carbohydrates.
Stored carbs. It's glucose, okay? Do you guys think that you used some glycogen while you were holding your arms up today? Absolutely you did. Okay, you used some. If you haven't had breakfast, okay, you are just churning out, your liver is just breaking down glycogen, spitting out glucose into your bloodstream all the time right now, because we're in between meals. Okay, but especially glycogen in muscles begins to be broken down almost immediately during any kind of exercise because you want to have glucose available. All right. During long duration exercise, probably not what you guys think. Long duration, think probably an hour to an hour and a half, depending upon where you start. You can run out and use up all of the glycogen in your muscles. Okay, you run out. When that happens, a strange thing occurs. You have plenty of fat available for energy still. If you're going an hour, right, it's aerobically dependent. This is not a thing where, oh gosh, I'm not a creatine phosphate, who cares? No, it's aerobic metabolism can do this. You've got this huge store of fat that you can break down to supply the energy for all of that. You've probably still got blood glucose for this. You're turning protein into glucose, and yet, once muscle glycogen is gone, we feel really shitty. And you want to stop. Okay? And you want to stop. Dare I ask, and anybody done like a half marathon or a marathon? It's really a marathon kind of distance thing.
Technically, yes.
Technically, yes. Okay. So there is a phenomenon called the wall. It used to be called the wall. If you run a marathon, you get to like mile 16, 17, 18, and you feel terrible. It's because your muscle glycogen is all gone. You have an ability to continue. Okay? You can continue, but you feel bad. And so people will slow down. They will want to stop. And so if that's what's happening, when glycogen gets depleted, that induces what kind of fatigue? Central. Very good. I still have substrate to make ATP. As you guys will see a little bit later today, or maybe on Wednesday with the hormone stuff, the brain needs glucose. So at all costs, when muscle glycogen is gone, the only place a muscle can get glucose is from the blood. The only place the brain can get glucose is from the blood. And so the brain starts getting very, very antsy, right? It's like, don't eat the last piece of pizza out of the fridge here, muscles. Let's hold on to some blood glucose so that we can continue to stay alive. So what it does then is it induces central fatigue. You feel worse, and it changes the excitability of motor neurons or the neurons in the motor cortex, and it inhibits their excitability. So you got to try harder to get the same force. And you can keep going, right? This right here, this, I'm gonna duck when I say this. This is the only time that Gatorade is of any benefit to you over water. Only time. The only time. Okay? Because Gatorade has carbohydrate. Okay? But when you drink that carbohydrate, when muscle glycogen is gone, if you supplement blood glucose and you keep your blood glucose levels higher, the brain freaks out less. So it will let you continue to exercise without feeling terrible. Okay? The fun thing about this is you don't even have to drink the Gatorade. All you have to do is put it in your mouth and swish it around and then spit it out. You have receptors in your mouth for glucose or for carbohydrates. When you stimulate those, the brain thinks, oh boy, here come carbs. And so then it prevents, it shuts off that inhibition. Called carbohydrate maltolerance in place. Right, so there's some fun things that we can do. That's how we're going to get that. So one instance of substrate depletion, PCR, that's peripheral. Glycogen depletion, especially muscle glycogen depletion, causes central fatigue. Okay? All right. So the last little thing I want to talk about really quickly here before we move on is the rate of recovery. This is a big deal. Okay? This is a big deal for everybody. Am I recovering? Is my heart rate variability off because I didn't sleep right? How hard can I exercise today? And make a big fuss about all of these kinds of things now. And there's some rhyme to it. There's some sort of magic fairy dust that's going on in there too. You recover, okay, from having your arms out. You recover in stages. Okay, you want to do it again? Sure. Yeah. Okay. Do what you're told. I like it. All right. You teach my daughter how to do that a little better.
Sorry, I'm not a miracle worker.
That's right. No one is a miracle worker. So recovery occurs in stages, and you're going to generally recover certain kinds of peripheral fatigue first. Other kinds of peripheral fatigue take a little bit longer. Okay. Central fatigue, it's going to vary. And then there is some peripheral fatigue. It may last for days. Okay. It may last for days. Typically, the fastest thing to recover is ion, things that are due to ions. Okay. If you'll just stop and rest and crank down ATP use, you will be able to recover sodium and potassium concentrations and gradients. You should generally be able to recover getting calcium back in, getting circuit to work, and getting calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's not really an ion, but you can recycle acetylcholine back into the nerve side of the neuromuscular junction. This usually will recover within a couple of minutes. Okay, within a couple of minutes. Hydrogen ions usually takes a little bit longer. Okay, it takes a little bit longer. Think about that epoch recovery curve, and think about hydrogen ions sort of falling in a similar kind of rate and manner as what oxygen consumption is doing after exercise. Usually within 10 or 15 minutes, you can recover all of that. Okay? All of you guys have seen this before, right? Everyone's like, oh, I worked out yesterday, I'm sore today because I've got lactic acid in my muscles still. Nope, it's all gone. It was gone within about 10 minutes of when you stopped exercising. It's all out. Okay? When you guys first put your arms down, probably acidity, higher levels of lactate in the blood, in the muscles, lower pH. But by now, you guys have almost completely recovered from all of that. Okay? The one that is a problem for us, and we don't really understand why, is excitation contraction coupling. We think most of it is not sodium potassium, so it's not action potential in the T-tubule that doesn't recover. There's something about the release of calcium, okay? The function of DHP and ryanodine that if we exercise you hard enough, gets messed up and does not recover, sometimes for several days, okay? Sometimes for several days. And it seems especially prominent during kind of lower intensity exercise. When you try really, really hard, you can make it work for a short period of time. But it takes, if you have lower kind of rates, you have some impairments there. Okay, it induces something called low frequency fatigue, so it's at low action potential rates, which are more common. So that's the longest one. Okay, if we tested you right now for how well your excitation contraction coupling works, most of you would have some level of impairment still. Probably not enough that it would be noticeable in your normal activities. Okay, but I do one set of exercise, I do one set of 10, I rest for 5 minutes, okay? I go to do another set of 10, I can only do 9 reps. The reason you're getting 9 is probably because of an impairment in excitation contraction couple. It's probably about calcium release and not able to get enough out there at the very end. That's the most likely thing if you give yourself enough rest to creatine phosphate.
You said it's more prominent at lower levels?
It tends to be, so it's more prominent at like the start. So it manifests when you do a longer period of time, or when you're doing something like I'm going reasonably high, but it's not the first rep or the second rep. You got to kind of get out a little ways before it's going to manifest. Okay. Nothing you can do to fix it. Nothing. We don't even fully understand it. Okay, but that's what we got. Okay. Questions about that, guys? Okay, so at 9:05, we will have our quiz. Your bonus or your incentive today is you can take your quiz with other people if you want. Okay, for everything. So it'll be a quiz over the VO2 stuff and fatigue. All right. Now what I want to do is we're going to go and talk about hormones. Who can tell me what a hormone is? And why this dude had taken a bunch of them.
Well, but why you taking a bunch of them is kind of evident.
Okay. All right. So why he's taking a bunch is evident. So what is a hormone? What is it? Yes, they travel in the blood. What are they?
A signaling molecule for the endocrine system.
Okay, a signaling molecule for the endocrine system. It is endocrine because it travels in the blood. Okay, so hormones are ways to communicate. It's how the body communicates. When there are things going on where we're disrupting homeostasis, we use hormones to help try to maintain that level of homeostasis. Okay, so what we're going to try to get through, and we'll do a little bit, and then I'm going to give you guys a take-home assignment on all of this. And you guys can see how old some of these things are. That when I first started putting these things together, do we know who these people are? Yes, Cole knows, right? You guys heard of Barry Bond? Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa. I don't know who the big dude is, the bodybuilder guy is. Ronnie Coleman. Okay, well, they've all clearly taken some things to enhance muscle mass. This is what most people think of when we say hormones, when we say steroids in the context of exercise. Most people think of anabolic hormones, make muscles bigger. Okay, And that's one part of things. But there's so many other things that hormones do that are likely way more important, okay? Way more important to exercise than just simply having bigger muscles or getting a protein synthesis response afterwards. In many ways, if we don't get the right hormone response, long distance endurance exercise, right? Cycling, running, the Ironman, where you're just a total crazy person, right? You gotta like swim like 3.5. You know how hard it is to swim a mile? You know how far that is?
It's swim 3 miles, do a marathon, and then I can't remember how
You
far.
bike like 150 miles or something, and then you gotta finish off by running the marathon. Right? It's crazy. The human body is amazing. We can do lots of things, but that shit is nuts. Okay? So, without the correct hormone response, you can't do any of these things. Okay? During a bout of exercise, we use hormones to primarily regulate blood glucose. Okay? To regulate blood glucose. We also use them to alter things in the cardiovascular system and in the pulmonary system. Okay, from a metabolic standpoint, the thing that hormones do that let this happen is it regulates glucose. Okay. Now, how many of you guys know, okay, what's supposed to happen with blood glucose all the time? Okay, what's supposed to happen?
Supposed to stay consistent.
Supposed to stay consistent. Very good. Okay. Any of you guys, just put your hand, anybody diabetic? Anybody know someone who's diabetic? Okay, a lot of you do, right? Welcome to the industrialized world in 2024, right? A third of people are type 2 diabetics, or a third of adults, or something like all of that. Okay? Glucose levels in the blood at almost all costs, the body will attempt to hold those levels constant. Okay? You didn't eat breakfast, you release hormones to kind of maintain blood glucose. Way to go, epi, norepi, cortisol, glucagon, these things are going to try to raise blood glucose and keep them constant. You've eaten, blood glucose goes up, here comes insulin to bring it back down. Okay? At all costs, the brain needs glucose, it needs a constant supply. We try to regulate it in a very, very tight range all the time. Okay? So it regulates that. One of the ways the hormones regulate blood glucose is through the breakdown of adipose tissue, through the breakdown of fat, so that we can put lipids or free fatty acids into the blood. And if you put more in the blood, you'll use those for energy rather than using glucose. So one way to maintain blood glucose is to just not use glucose. Okay? And so we can do that by increasing fat levels. Okay? This is one of the tricks of lower carb, higher fat diets for people that are diabetic. It does help in some ways regulate blood glucose because you're just feeding yourself more fat and less glucose, so you end up using more fat in it. You don't get kind of the shifts and the spikes in blood glucose. Okay? Other things that it does is it helps regulate fluid balance. Okay? Fluid balance. You guys exercise, you have to pee. It's hot out, probably not, right? You're going to shunt blood away a little bit. Now, eventually you will, because blood pressure goes in those ways. Okay? You need, during endurance exercise, you need to hang on to the plasma in your blood for sweating and for evaporative cooling. Okay? This is the part where I'm like, okay, I should tell the story. Anybody know how to run a smoker? I smoked a brisket this weekend. Yeah. So evaporative cooling plays a role when you smoke things, when the brisket gets to a certain internal temperature, because it's fine. When it's the whole separate deal. We'll talk about it later. I don't want to talk about my brisket making and these things. But
Maybe hungry for brisket. Great.
I know, I'm sorry, we ate all of it yesterday. We had brisket for Easter
And you had it smoked, just why do you put trust?
Sorry, right? If I had known, I could have gone to, is it Rudy's or someplace and gotten you guys, they have like breakfast brisket, like burritos and those things. Yeah, it's smoked brisket and egg and sausage and stuff, quite good. Okay, fluid balance. Hormones control fluid balance, okay? Antidiuretic hormone, aldosterone, okay? Control sodium and water retention, kidney. Right, probably everybody's, one of your least favorite things from human phys is talking about renal function, right? We talk about the interaction between renal function and the cardiovascular system. Your kidneys control your blood pressure, right? So, anyway, one of our grad students, he eats a bag of chips, his blood pressure goes up. Why? Sodium levels go up, his kidneys start holding on to water to try to balance out that sodium level. So his plasma volume goes up, and his blood pressure goes up correspondingly. All in like a half hour. It's wild. Okay. And then the anabolic process. Okay, protein synthesis, muscle growth, muscle repair, things that happen during one bout will at least go up, lead to kind of delayed effects here. But it's really these two things for endurance exercise that are going to play the biggest role for us. Okay, they're going to play the biggest role. So let's talk about substrate use and control of substrate use in metabolism, especially aerobic metabolism on this. Okay, when we exercise, energy demand goes up. Can we all stipulate to that? So we're holding your arms, you're using more energy than you were at rest. Should have done it. I could have looked, actually wore my watch today. We could have looked at our heart rates during that. Okay. We have to increase substrate availability. We need more glucose, more free fatty acids to meet that aerobic energy demand. So we've got something to put into the pathway. Okay. Does that make sense? We do this by mobilizing stored lipid from fat and stored glucose from glycogen and putting it into either the bloodstream, or if we have some stored in a muscle, by breaking it down and making it immediately available to go into the mitochondria and into the Krebs cycle. Okay? So, what are the storage molecules? Carbs are stored as glycogen. That was pretty easy and straightforward. Carbs are stored as glycogen. There's glycogen in the liver, and there's glycogen in your muscles. Okay. Exercise stimulates the breakdown of both muscle and liver glycogen. Break it down, make glucose available for glycolysis, so we can make some pyruvate. So we've got it ready now, quickly, for energy if we need it. Fat is stored in adipose tissue. Mostly. Okay. I have fat stored in my flabby tricep. You also have some fat inside a muscle, inside individual muscle fibers. You have a little bit. Okay. It is a slower process, but exercise through hormones also increases the breakdown of stored fat or stored lipids into what are called free fatty acids. So you put some out of my flabby tricep into the bloodstream, so muscles can pull it in and use it if they need to, and you break down what's in the muscle so that there's some floating around free fatty acids inside the muscle, ready to go into the mitochondria if we need. Okay. Mitochondria doesn't care. It just knows that it needs substrate. Energy demand is up. We need something to put in here to help us make more ATP. Okay. So whichever thing gets broken down more or dumps more in there, we're just going to use more of it. We'll talk about the subtleties of that on Wednesday. Okay. Where do they go? They go to the blood, or they go into the cytoplasm in a muscle, right? If they've been stored there in the muscle. Okay. So Why do we have to control plasma glucose? We talked about this a few minutes ago, but I want to try to illustrate this again, because it's really, really important, okay? The brain needs glucose, okay? I'm sorry that I have like a blow up version of a brain there. I just thought it looked really cool. You just want to like squish it or something. Okay. The brain needs glucose. Brain functions only on glucose. The brain cannot use fat. It only uses glucose. And the place that it gets that glucose is out of your blood. Okay. The glucose can cross the blood-brain barrier. So, in order for you to stay alive, have to have adequate blood glucose levels. Okay? Have to have adequate blood glucose. And so one of the things that happens when you start to exercise is blood glucose is going to begin to fall. Because one of the primary things that muscle contractions do is pull glucose in. You contract a muscle, it drives a molecule called GLUT4 out to the membrane of the muscle, and it wants to pull glucose out of the blood because the muscle needs that glucose to make energy. So the normal response to exercise is blood glucose will begin to fall. Well, that's not good for the brain, so we have to have a mechanism or a way that as it begins to fall, things will happen to raise it back up and hold it relatively constant. So that whatever's being taken in by the muscle is getting matched by an increase from someplace else, mostly from glycogen breakdown in the liver. Okay. This is mostly the function of liver glycogen. As blood glucose dips because you're using it, that stimulates the liver to break down glycogen, and it's really, really good. It's very, very tightly controlled. Okay. Liver dumping glucose back into the bloodstream almost exactly matches glucose being taken out of the bloodstream at all times. It's very tightly controlled. Okay. Now, when you run out of liver glycogen, then things get a little dicey. Okay. Things can get a little bit dicey, but that's what we're going to do there. Okay. So if I want to keep blood glucose constant, I have to do several things. One, I can not use that blood glucose for metabolism. So I can use muscle glycogen instead. So I'm not going to pull it out of the blood, I'm going to use it from here. Okay. I can also use fat from in the muscle or from the blood as an energy source. And that keeps me from using that blood glucose and keeping it constant as well. So there's this delicate balance between using it, not using it, and then trying to maintain it kind of up in the blood. Okay. All right. So release into the blood from the liver, okay, and then from turning protein that maybe you've eaten in the liver into glucose through gluconeogenesis is one of the primary ways that we match release to demand. Okay, you want to be sort of at a net zero. Whatever you pull out, let's put it back in from the liver. Okay. The other things that we're going to want to try to do is we can use muscle glycogen to spare blood glucose. When I say spare, I mean not use. But that causes fatigue as well. If you use up all your muscle glycogen, that causes fatigue. So we start off using some glycogen so we don't use blood glucose. And then over time, we'll continue to not use blood glucose, but we'll start to crank down using muscle glycogen as well. And we'll try to use fat, or we'll try to supplement blood glucose by drinking a sports drink or eating a piece of candy or something during exercise. That's the way that we're going to try to do these things. Okay? So there's this kind of delicate interplay going back and forth and back and forth. And a lot of this is driven primarily by hormones. This is what we use hormones during exercise to help us do. Okay. And this is why getting and understanding the proper response is so important. Big picture, from a performance standpoint, okay, if you're going to undertake endurance exercise, we need to try to do two things. Okay, we want to match glucose uptake, so glucose going from the blood into the muscle to the release of glucose from the liver, so that blood glucose stays constant. That's our one primary goal. That lets us have energy in the muscle and also glucose to keep the brain happy. That's our number one initial sort of thing. Once we've done that, and we feel pretty good about that, then as exercise progresses, if we can do something to spare or hang on to or not use up all of our muscle glycogen, that's also going to be a positive thing to prevent. And the primary way that we spare muscle glycogen is to increase our use of fat for energy. Okay? So initially, we need to break down liver glycogen so that we can keep dumping that into the blood to maintain blood glucose. And then the second thing is that over time, we want to use hormones to increase the breakdown of adipose tissue. So we can put more fat into the blood so that hopefully we'll use that fat rather than using blood glucose or muscle glycogen. Those are going to be our big picture goals. And the proper hormone response allows that to happen. Okay, it allows all of that to happen. Okay, we'll do one more thing, and then it'll probably be time for us to take the quiz. Yeah, we got just a couple of minutes. Okay. So you guys got this already. What's a hormone? It's a chemical messenger. It is a hormone because it's in the blood. Epinephrine and norepinephrine in your blood are hormones. Epinephrine and norepinephrine in your brain or in the cardiovascular system coming out of various places or in nerves, it's a neurotransmitter. Okay? All it is about the location. It's the same molecule, it's just about the location. So to be a hormone, it travels in the blood. Hormones come from mostly what we call endocrine organs. What's an endocrine organ? It's something that makes a hormone. It's kind of a lovely circular definition. It makes a chemical messenger and it puts it into the blood. Okay? We will go through, right, as part of your take-home assignment, you guys will go through various endocrine organs that are important for helping us to regulate blood glucose. Ooh, the red does not show up. How do hormones signal? This is the key thing. Hormones bind to receptors. Okay? They bind to receptors. You're a hormone, you're walking down the aisle here on the things, one of your friends in class is the receptor, you walk by, they grab you, and then something happens. Okay? Where the receptor is located on the target tissue is going to be dependent upon the type of hormone that we have. Okay? Some hormones have receptors on the surface of certain cells. Generally, those are what we call peptide hormones. They will have a difficult time crossing the plasma membrane, so the receptor is on that end. Steroid hormones, on the other hand, steroid hormones tend to go into the cell and bind to receptors like in the nucleus or inside of the cell. If they're a steroid, because they've got fat or lipid in them, they can cross the membrane. We'll get into some of those. Hormones bind to their receptor and they initiate some kind of signal that will then tell that cell or that tissue to do something. Okay? To do something. Communicate. Right? Okay. We'll stop here. You guys can take the quiz with as many people as you want. I don't care. Okay? The quiz will be there. It should open up in, like, maybe now. I'm going to post, okay? I'm going to post an assignment. It's going to be a chart. You're going to go through on this chart and write down the hormone, write down its endocrine organ, write down its target tissue, write down what it's supposed to do during exercise. Let's go up, let's go down, and then what's its function. Okay? The answers and the things to put in those are in the slides that we haven't gotten to yet. So I want you guys to work on that and bring it to class. Okay, you're gonna bring it to class on Wednesday, and then we'll turn it in on Wednesday after you're gonna talk about it. Okay? Pardon?
Paper form.
You can bring it in paper form, you can bring it typed out, that part doesn't really matter. You can do it with a friend, just make sure you and your friend get your names on it. Okay? We're not gonna have a test next week, we're gonna push it back. Okay, we need to get through this and the cardiovascular system stuff, push it back. Okay, it's not gonna be that. It'll be the Monday or the Wednesday of the week after. Okay. Good deal. When you guys are done, you're good, you can go.